Thank you everyone for joining us for our event, Asian Americans in the Labor Movement, the history of our heritage and history of organizing. And today, who we have as our guest is a really exciting panel. And for me, it's sort of like a reunion because I haven't seen some of these faces in years. And it's just a gathering of civil rights leaders because workers' rights is civil rights. And I'm just really excited to introduce them to you after I present on our land acknowledgements. My name is Myra Demopius, and I am streaming from San Antonio, Texas. And the land that we're on is Yanawana, home to the people of Kowaltikan, Somisek, Eshtokna, and Tonkoa. And I invite other panel members to acknowledge their land.
I'm Scott Kurashige in Texas, Fort Worth, Texas, on the historic homeland of Wichita and affiliated tribes.
I'm Aki Soriano-Versoza. I'm here from Tonga and Kit's land.
Hi, this is Kent Wong from the UCLA Labor Center, and this is Tonga land here in Los Angeles.
I'm Mary Jung. I'm in San Francisco, and I'm on Ohlone land.
I'm Shwe Aung. I am in Houston, Texas.
And I'm also here from Los Angeles with my sister and brother, Aquilina and Kent.
And I believe we have also Biju Mathew, who is in New York. And Biju, I don't know if you could hear us.
Yes, I can, and I will be on video in a minute. Wonderful to meet everybody, and I am here on Lenape land in New York.
Thank you everyone for land acknowledgement. I also want to take this time that the people of Palestine also deserve to acknowledge their land. And we encourage everyone around the world to support the people of Palestine. And I'm excited to introduce our guest. Secretary Julie Su is a Secretary of Labor with the California Labor and Workforce Development Agency, with a long track record of advocacy for low-wage workers and immigrant workers, and is known for the significant milestones in labor history, including the case of the Thai garment workers, where she led the litigation for this landmark civil and workers' rights case that set precedent for other low-wage workers. We also have Kent Wong, director of UCLA Labor Center and founding president of APALA, or Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, which is part of AFL-CIO. He also teaches labor studies and ethnic studies, and is the first, and has published more than a dozen books on the labor movement, immigrant rights, popular education, and the Asian American community. Scott Kurashige is a professor and chair in the Department of Comparative Race and Ethnic Studies at Texas Christian University. He has authored or co-authored 4 books: The Shifting Grounds of Race, Black and Japanese Americans in the Making of Multi-Ethnic Los Angeles, The Next American Revolution, Sustainable Activism for the 21st Century with Grace Lee Boggs, Exile to Motown, A History of Japanese Americans in Detroit and the 50-Year Rebellion, How the US Political Crisis Began in Detroit. Biju Mathew is a co-founder and executive member of New York Taxi Workers Alliance and secretary of the National Taxi Workers Alliance, AFL-CIO. His areas of work include immigrant labor organizing, left political education, and transnational solidarity campaigns. His most recent area of research and organizing revolves around the Imagine politics of data and value. He's also Associate Professor of Information Systems and American Studies at Rider University in New Jersey. His book titled Taxi, Cabs and Capitalism in New York City was published by Cornell University Press. We also have Aquilina Soriano, founder and current executive director of the Filipino Worker Center of Southern California, a nonprofit serving and organizing low-wage Filipino workers in the LA community. She's been the executive director of PwC for 17 years and has been working in the Filipino community for 22 years, both in Los Angeles and in the Philippines. She's also a dear friend of mine from our earlier days of organizing. Shwe is the president of APALA. He has a long history of organizing that goes all the way back to Burma when he was organizing seafarers there. He left home, he left the country of Burma during his final year in college to work on a ship in 1995, and soon discovered there was a stark difference of working in union and non-union work sites. In Burma, police arrest people for no reason to get bribes, according to Aung. And in Bangkok, the General Secretary of the Federation of Trade Unions of Burma asked him to join a union, where he did try to set up a seafarers union there. Mary Jung who was recently featured, if you watched it this year, in the movie or the docufilm 905, The Story of a Movement, for her role in the early history of organizing women's rights in Ohio. She found her activism when she decided to go to forego college for a year and instead volunteer for a presidential campaign. She went on to become an organizer, organizing for women's rights when she was 20 years old, where she found herself the only Asian woman organizing in her area. She went on later to become the chair of the San Francisco Democratic Party. And I just want to start with Julie Sue. Julie Sue, I want to congratulate you for all your accomplishments since I met you in the 1990s. What would you like to share? And of course, I want to congratulate you for being a nominee for the Deputy Secretary of Labor position, which is historical itself. But of course, you deserve it because of all your accomplishments. What would you like to share about currently being the nominee for Deputy Secretary of Labor and its pertinence to celebrating our heritage as Asian Americans?
Myra, thank you so much. And I just want to echo your feeling, what you said about this feeling like a reunion. We're all coming off such a horrific year where so many people have experienced so much deep and painful loss. And we've been separated from the people that we love. I've only seen my parents in their backyard, but some haven't seen at all. And I'm really filled with gratitude that in this month, you organize an event that feels like a family reunion of people. Like you said, we met, was it 30 years ago? In LA, working together, and it's just an example of how many people worked on, on the case involving the Thai workers. So many people came together with them to fight in their historic battle for justice. And then, of course, Kent, who is my hero and mentor and trailblazer, who paved the path that I and so many others have walked on, and Aquilina, who created this organization. When you were saying how long she's been in the game, it's like she doesn't look like she could be old enough to have done that, but she created and built and leads this organization, the Filipino Worker Center. And among the many things that it has done, it has also been a partner in the work that we've tried to do in government to try and transform how we enforce for the most vulnerable workers. And without Aquilina's leadership, we never could have done that. And then Scott, the professor who embodies the scholar activist and gives us words and a framework to tell our stories, to understand our histories. And to everybody here, I'm just so honored to be here with you all. It's also really poignant to do so in a year where in the last year alone, there have been more documented anti-Asian incidents than in the 10 years combined prior of documentation. My own mother has been afraid to go out for over a year. And so coming together is even really more meaningful at a time like this, I think. So in terms of your question about my nomination, thank you for the warmth. And I guess I'll say the first reaction is that to be honest, I have some disbelief about it. I have never sort of been involved in politics in the traditional sense, but I think I'm here because of the strength of workers, frankly. My whole career has been spent trying to fight alongside low-wage workers and organizations dedicated to workers, and with amazing organizers who've taught me what I know. I spent 17 years at now it's called Asian Americans Advancing Justice, and I went to an organization that was intentionally really cross-racial and cross-community in its approach, and very much about fighting poverty and exclusion in our own community. And so when I left to go into state government, I promised the workers that I had represented that I would do everything in my power to be sure that they were heard at the highest levels of state government. And so if I'm confirmed to this job at the federal level, I would carry that same promise forward into the federal government. But the second thing is I really feel very inspired by and lifted up by our community. It was API's demanding representation, really making a case for why we needed a cabinet that looked like America. I mean, of course, the president and the vice president care about those things, but the API community was really strong in making a case for that. And I guess I'll just say one thing about that I think doesn't get said enough, which is that it's really important that when people talk about that, we're not talking about trying to bring unqualified people into a job just because we want representation, right? It really is about seeking out qualifications in communities that are not usually, of those in power. And I think that's really relevant to what we're talking about here. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that, I feel a great sense of possibility about it. The global pandemic has really changed life as we know it. It's hit vulnerable communities the hardest, right? We know this about this for African Americans, for Latinx communities, Pacific Islanders, Filipino health workers and caregivers, for hospitality workers, many, immigrant and of color, women, the elderly, low-wage workers, and especially women of color. We've seen people get, millions unemployed, but we also know that before the pandemic, even people who were employed were not enjoying the quality of jobs, like livable wages and health benefits and job security and union protections and upward mobility that are needed for true security and satisfaction. So it's an opportunity now. It fills me with hope to imagine being a part of an administration that really cares about that. And we have also seen over the last few years a real crisis in our democracy, right? It includes a lack of faith in our institutions of government. And for workers, the justified fear of government, right? When government is anti-immigrant, anti-poor, and espouses racist views, many workers become even more vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. So we have an opportunity. We need to rebuild our economy. We need to reverse decades-long trends that occurred before the pandemic, right, of growth in low-wage work and a growing gap between the rich and the poor. We need our government to embrace the role of organizing and organizers and unions to change the balance of power in workplaces. And I am really, I've seen throughout my career, right, what happens when garment workers and construction workers and car washeros and janitors and caregivers and farm workers and warehouse workers and restaurant workers organize, and government has a role to play in leveling that playing field and in supporting workers in exercising those kinds of rights. And we need to bake into our other priorities an attention to creating good jobs, of rejecting multiple layers of subcontracting and misclassification and wage theft that have characterized too many parts of our economy. So I am filled with hope about the opportunity to do that. We need to enforce laws, right? That's part of the Department of Labor's role. When I first came into state government, there were people even inside of government who would say, it's too hard to combat wage theft because workers are too scared. But what I often say is I've learned from a lifetime of fighting alongside workers for their rights that it's not really their fear that holds us back, it's ours. So being in a position of government to be fearless, to turn ideas and laws into meaningful and real conditions in the workplace is really exciting for me. And I think, we need to breathe life into laws and policies to help workers exercise their own power, and also, translate ideas into meaningful conditions in the workplace. So I'm excited about playing a role in that, and hopefully, carrying forward the faith of my community into the position if I'm confirmed.
Thank you, Secretary Julie. And definitely you are the right person for the job. Julie and I, for the audience, we worked with the Thai women together. And, I was a caseworker at the time at a nonprofit agency that served them. And, I know that Secretary Julie Su is the right person for the job. And in one sentence, what would you say to organizers out there that might just be starting in the movement, or maybe organizers that have been in it for a long time? In one sentence, what would you like to say to them?
Gosh, in one sentence, I would say, of course, thank you for what you do. And I believe that this is our time. I believe this is your time. I think, we need API leaders to be seen and heard in all aspects of life, but especially in this all important fight for worker justice. And this is your time. Let's build the world that workers deserve and that we all want to see. That was a really long sentence. I'm sorry.
And Secretary Julie, a lot of us are sort of connected together because of John DeLauro. John DeLauro was an activist that I worked a lot with when I was younger, and he had the iconic, you could spot him in any rally or march because he either had the bandana and the trench coat, or with the Jessica McClintock campaign, he wore Jessica McClintock prom dresses. And so he had different creative ways, innovative ways to highlight and draw attention to whatever campaign he was working on. That was John. And so do you have anything to share? What do you remember John DeLauro the most for?
Yeah, I'll build on what you said, Myra. So I met John because of the Jessica McClintock campaign. I was a first-year lawyer at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, and John was, as you said, the guy in the picket line in the prom dresses, who often had a bullhorn but didn't actually need one. And what happened was Jessica McClintock sued the protesters, right? The company sued AWA, the Asian Immigrant Women Advocates, and its sister organization, Kiwa in Los Angeles, which is now the Koreatown Immigrant Workers Alliance. So I remember three things about John from meeting him at that time. One was that, again, I was a very new lawyer, but I really believed in the cause and the struggle. And I loved the students showing up in their jeans and t-shirts in Beverly Hills at this, fancy corner where for a whole bunch of reasons, people looked at them like they didn't belong. And I wanted to help defend against this case. Once the case was filed, many people were legitimately really afraid of what that meant, right? Like, now we're being sued. What happens if we lose? Will I get kicked out of school? Like, there's, very legitimate fears when people have power in the law. And I was afraid that I was not up to the task of actually representing these organizations and these students. But John was somebody who always said, we want you to be our lawyer. We want you to be our lawyer because you're the one who's driving to meetings to talk to the students on campus. You're the one who's marching with us on the picket lines. You know what we're fighting for, so you should be it. And that was so powerful for me that at that time, that idea of like, who's the right person, I think just stayed with me forever. And so it's just like a, reminder of the way John put his faith in people, and it gave, I think, people like me faith in ourselves that we didn't otherwise have. The second thing is what I think everyone say, John is forever going to be the chant leader against which all chant leaders should be measured against. And my favorite chant of his, and I picture him all the time in it, is your dresses, you're pink, your wages, they stink. And he was very creative that way with all kinds of chants along those lines. And the third thing I'll just say about John is that it's just his joy and kindness. This work is hard. Everybody who's listening, who's an organizer, knows this, but it can break your heart. And the world is filled with things that are wrong, and you have to be brave and you take risks, and sometimes it's lonely, but the struggle should be joyful. And John embodied that. He lived that. And, treating people with kindness is an organizer's secret weapon. And I think that to me is how I'll always remember John.
Thank you for sharing that. I heartily agree. I remember a conversation I had with John where he sort of cautioned me on make sure that your activism isn't based on anger.
Mhm.
And that sort of grounded me because it helped me self-reflect, and if your activism is based on anger, maybe you need a timeout for self-care, and I remember John the same way you do. uh, can't what is the significance of John Delors' work and Julie Sue's nomination?
Well, first, thank you, Myra, for bringing us all together. And indeed, it does feel like a reunion of old friends and some new friends, but very much people who are deeply committed to a common agenda for social and economic justice. And I think especially now when the Asian American community is under attack across the country, to sense this spirit of unity and a bond of the common motive that we share to build a more just and a more equitable society for everyone. I think that this is what sustains us and keeps us together. John Deloro was my student at UCLA, and the first project that we worked on is a release of the first book that I published on my good friend Philip Veracruz. Philip was the highest ranking Filipino in the United Farm Workers of America, and he would come to campuses. My beginnings with the labor movement were as a boycott organizer for the United Farm Workers of America when I was in high school and in college. And Philip was the first Asian American labor leader I ever met. And I was astonished that the Filipino labor union actually launched the Delano grape strike. And it was a merger with the Mexican American Labor Union that led to the birth of the United Farm Workers of America. This is a story, this is a history that the vast majority of Asians in America do not know. And so I learned that through my work with Philip, and I learned that through my work with the farm workers. But the first activity that John and I organized was this book event with Philip Veracruz. And Philip took an immediate liking to John and really saw him as someone who had tremendous passion, tremendous drive, tremendous spirit. And he tracked John and his history. And Philip, for his time, was the highest ranking Filipino labor leader in the country. And who would have ever imagined that John would go on to become the president of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, a leader within the Service Employees International Union, and indeed, one of the highest ranking Filipino labor leaders in the country, who was nationally respected and known. So John participated in an APALA Organizing Institute all the way back in 1994. And he became an organizer for SEIU. And he traveled to different parts of the country to organize, but the finest organizing campaign that he took on was to organize his mother's hospital in Northridge. And he was so proud of that victory, where he was able to bring justice to his mother's workplace and to see the expression of his mom and her coworkers when they celebrated that victory together. John went on to become the first director of the Dolores Huerta Labor Institute, where he built an extraordinary labor studies program in the 9-campus LA Community College district, and inspired students on all 9 community college campuses, as well as the students that he continued to teach at UCLA through the Asian American Studies program. So it has been 11 years since his passing, and I still think of John a lot. We have a new book coming out to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the founding of APALA, and on the cover is an image of John Deloro back in 1995 at the APALA convention, taken by Corky Lee, who recently passed away, but who documented the whole history of the Asian American movement. And at that fateful convention back in 1995, the major focus was to mobilize national support for the Thai garment workers. And so we had many speakers who stood on the convention floor to talk about these sweatshop conditions in New York Chinatown, and the sweatshop conditions in El Monte, California, and the abuse and exploitation of Asian American women that has existed over the generations. So I think it's appropriate that we talk about both John Deloro's legacy and the extraordinary work that Julie Su has done through her career, not only in being the lead attorney on the Thai garment case, not only winning landmark legislation to hold manufacturers and retailers liable for the sweatshop conditions under which their clothes are manufactured, and to go on to be such a fierce advocate for worker rights, for immigrant rights, for women's rights in the state of California. I was so honored to see the extraordinary work of Julie Su as the California Secretary of Labor, but I know that her best contributions are yet to come. And as Deputy Secretary of Labor for the Federal Department of Labor, all of the talent and energy and commitment that she brought as Secretary of Labor to the state of California will be able to be transferred nationally to a working class that desperately needs the support of a fierce and talented worker advocate in Washington, D.C. in this administration. So we are extremely proud of Julie for everything that she has accomplished, but for all the things that she will accomplish in this new role. And we are here to back you up, to support you, and to do everything that we can collectively to ensure your success.
I agree, Kent. What was the social, political, and academic environment like when you started UCLA Labor Center and APALA?
APALA is celebrating its 30th anniversary, and we're so excited that we have grown a new generation of Asian American organizers, Asian American worker activists, and in preparing this book that's going to be published in July, it is so amazing to read the stories of those that have gone before us, Philip Veracruz, Domingo Inviernes, who were assassinated by the Marcos dictatorship and who were leaders of the Longshore Workers Union in Seattle, of people like Sue Embry, a teacher in Los Angeles who spearheaded the fight for redress and reparations and to declare Manzanar a National Historic Site, to make sure that people never forget the incarceration of Japanese Americans in concentration camps during World War II. And to all of the extraordinary union organizers who have dedicated their lives to the improvement of the lives of workers throughout the country, and the courage and the heroism of day-to-day organizers. I feel very fortunate to work at the UCLA Labor Center. I feel very fortunate to be in a city that in many ways has become a national focal point of the US labor movement. The 800,000 men and women in unions in Los Angeles have really taken on a much more comprehensive social justice unionism perspective. I'm so thrilled that Los Angeles has emerged as the focal point of the worker center movement and the work that Aquilina has done at the Filipino Worker Center, and this extraordinary network of worker centers that have advanced worker rights under very challenging conditions. I'm so excited to be in a city that has emerged as a focal point of the immigrant rights movement. The largest May Day demonstration in US history took place on May 1st, 2006, when 1 million immigrant workers filled the streets. And I'm so proud to be in a city that has emerged as a focal point of the immigrant youth movement. We at the UCLA Labor Center are celebrating the 10th anniversary of Dream Summer that has placed more than 800 undocumented immigrant youth leaders in over 20 states in social justice organizations. And they have led the fight for DACA. They have led the fight for the California Dream Act. They have opened up doors for undocumented immigrant youth that never before existed. And this fight is more timely now than ever when immigration reform is back on the national agenda for the first time in over a decade. So I feel fortunate to be at the UCLA Labor Center. I feel fortunate to be a part of the APALA family and APALA community. And I really look forward to the coming period when we can secure meaningful immigration reform, meaningful worker rights reform, and to make sure that this administration lives up to the promise of the people of this country.
Thank you, Ken. I can't wait to read that book. And I, although not everyone in our audience, excuse me, might be in Los Angeles, the reason why we do need to have continuity, in history and between states, and recognize accomplishments across the nation, and unify with others across, across regions, across borders of states, is because without continuity, we don't realize the significance of our history and our heritage. When it's divided from each other, that's when we don't know enough. We don't know the Phil Vera Cruz. We don't know the John DeLauros. And without knowing them, we don't know if we're blocking younger generation from being inspired by them. So it's absolutely important to see one another across the regions in the United States. And later on, we'll also talk about the international relevance of our work. I wanted to also ask Dr. Scott Kurashige, who's a professor at Texas Christian University, having worked with both John DeLauro and Secretary Julie Su before, what is the significance of their work as you see it?
So thank you so much. It's just such an honor to be part of this panel. I'm just really in awe of all the work everyone has done, and I'm excited to learn more about the work that you all are doing in Texas, as I just moved here last year. So I met John when I was a graduate student at UCLA. He was finishing his undergraduate degree. The two things I remember: he was a performance artist before he got into activism, and his first political work was volunteering for the Jerry Brown insurgent campaign for president in 1992. I think you used to still wear that. It had the 1-800 number on that We the People hat, and we were like,
I remember.
We've never really met someone like this, but it's so true. John was really one of a kind. I mean, he grew on everybody very, very quickly because he was just so tireless and full of energy and creativity and drive as an organizer. So we were doing a lot of student organizing. We also had a study group where we wanted to look more deeper at class issues and labor issues, and our collective decided that we really wanted to get more involved in Asian American issues, but also to break this model minority story of just focusing on Asian Americans in at university level or in professionals jobs. And so really it was getting involved with KIWA, Korean Immigrant Workers Act, because this was right after the 1992 the rebellion with KIWA was such an important organization promoting multiracial unity and promoting the working class interest in the rebuilding of Koreatown, right? So that was one of the first big campaigns. There were all kinds of relief monies that came into Koreatown, and KIWA was there to raise the class concerns. Rebuilding Koreatown, the money should just not go to business owners, right? I mean, obviously they suffered, but what about the workers? And the workers were not just Korean Americans, right? Many of them were Latino. And so, that was an important struggle, but KIWA, as Julie pointed out, and that's how I met Julie, was because there was a solidarity campaign that we were doing with the immigrant workers, right, who were basically victims of wage theft by Jessica McClintock. These high fashion designers would use these third-party subcontractors to basically avoid liability for their human rights violations, right? And there was really a political and ethical campaign to hold Jessica McClintock accountable for that. And I had totally forgotten how they sued us for the protests. It's all coming back to me 20-something years later. But yeah, I mean, I was really impressed meeting Julie because, she came from a very prestigious law school. I'm not going to name drop here, but I imagine that what she was making in her first year working on the job after graduating was probably less than some of her, corporate law fellow students were making in their internships for during the summer before they graduated. but that's because, she is someone who had many, many options for individual events, but really chose to work with the people, right? And with the workers. And that's the kind of, I think, social justice commitment that is just so necessary, not just for Asian American communities, but for the whole country, for the whole world. So I moved away from LA shortly after that. I moved to Detroit. So I didn't get to work much longer with everybody. But as I went to Detroit, I had a chance to work very closely with Grace Lee Boggs, who many people know is a source of inspiration for Asian American activists. And really, my last interaction with John was when Grace basically before she passed away, made her last trip to LA. Kind of knew it was probably, she was stopping travel. She was in her, mid to late 90s by then. And John was really the one that organized a meeting for Grace with Asian American communities. If you watch the documentary film, American Revolution, you actually see John at Enrique and Presley de la Cruz's house hosting this gathering of people, mostly Asian Americans. Partly because he was really motivated to do it, and I just really trusted John as an organizer. And that was also so important for Grace, who really in many ways, and you can see this in her own autobiography, downplayed her own Asian American identity. She didn't have connections to a lot of Asian American communities because she said she got politicized before the Asian American community existed. She met with Biju many times in New York. They got very close. And I think, I think that's another important side. All these legacies to me come together, remembering Grace Lee Boggs, who lived to be 100, remembering John, whose, departure was just so shocking and tragic. But clearly the legacy of all these folks continues to inspire us.
I agree, Scott. And then I'm excited to ask this question because it's very rare that I hear it in panels. What is the impact of Asian Americans in the labor movement on social justice as a whole? And what time it is in the clock of the world today? Which is a quote from Grace Lee Boggs.
Yes, I'll answer this, as my prior job as a historian, and leave the sort of contemporary issues to those who are really doing the organizing on the ground. I mean, at this moment, it's really important to challenge those stereotypes that Asian Americans have never been politically active before this recent upsurge, which is very important, but is not unprecedented, right? We need to recognize that Asian American workers, from Chinese railroad workers who went on strike to Japanese workers who formed alliance with Mexican farm workers in the turn of the 20th century, to the multiracial workers in Hawaii. My great-grandfather came to Hawaii as a sugar plantation contract laborer, so that's part of my own history. There's an important legacy of struggle and resistance among Asian American workers, but as I've been pointing out, there's this important legacy, and Kent alluded to United Farm Workers model of multiracial solidarity that comes from the activism of Asian American workers. And what's really important when I think about John and Julie's work in the 90s, along with Kent and Aquilina and Biju and probably everyone on this panel, the 90s was really a breakthrough time, I think, for the worker center, right, model of organizing. And if you look at John, he was involved in APALA, but he was also involved in PwC, right? He worked with trade unions, but he also worked with community organizations and students. And I think we understand historically, there have been these, there have been these sort of forms of division among the working class, and then division of class issues from gender issues and racial issues and immigration issues, right? And I think the worker center model, and the Labor Center UCLA was a big part of this too, was so important in breaking down those barriers, promoting those intersectional forms of unity. And so I think, with the work with Thai CDC, with the work with Kiwa, AWA, PwC, TWA, y'all sort out all these acronyms later. Sorry, I'm doing a little my own reminiscing here. These were all, in many ways, Asian American based worker center groups who formed alliances among workers of different racial backgrounds and also created this bridge, right, between community organizations and trade unions, right? That really, I think, allowed us to get at the multi-dimensions of both exploitation and oppression, but also organizing and solidarity.
So many important points you just made there. And it's almost like, I wish this whole panel was a film to capture. I wish I was a filmmaker. But I completely agree with you about the importance of intersectionality and you know, both centering our work around the people that are mostly impacted and having the class consciousness and doing intersectional and solidarity work. And I also want to, you know, take note that after moving to Texas, I realized that the difference of a city that doesn't have a strong university community that is actively teaching on class issues and issues that affect people who are, you know, communities that are disenfranchised and, you know, labor issues. Without that presence in university settings in a city, it really does impact the consciousness of the younger people in that city. And I believe that in Los Angeles, what I saw, I thought would be available in other cities I would move to, where there was like a continuity between the generations. And I think part of that was because academia was on par with activists and community organizers. And, you know, especially in the 90s, that's sort of like what you alluded to, Scott, where like everyone played a role in sort of elevating each other's work, but also that intersectionality was what made the 90s different. And Biju, Mathew, I want to ask you, you know, how did the National Taxi Workers Alliance and New York Taxi Workers Alliance start? What was it that led to its beginning, and what is the greatest impact of the organization locally and nationally today? I think you're in mute. I think you're on mute still.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Thanks, Myra. And I am a little overwhelmed by just everybody who's spoken, Julie, Ken, Scott, and the stories they've said, you know, they've told us already. You know, it's actually, I don't know, I'm just a person by who I am who gets, you know, pulled into stories in ways that I feel overwhelmed. So I'm sorry if I'm not going to be too coherent right up front. Wonderful to be here. Thanks so much. And thanks for all the wonderful work that everybody here is doing. And I am coming, and I told Myra this earlier when we spoke earlier in the day, that I might have to excuse myself at the moment's notice from this panel because we are in the middle of a really crazy, one more battle of a lifetime, because Uber and Lyft and its company union, the Machinist IDG, and the New York State Labor Fed are all together right now working to try and push through a really pathetic, regressive third category bill. And we've been battling that for the last week, and we'll continue to battle that. They always do this, bring it into the last minute before session closes. Session closes on June 10th. So we have, 2 weeks of battling to do. It's good. The fight's going well. It's a defensive fight, but we also know it's a defensive fight to stop this bill from going through, because it opens up the space for a range of offensive fights, including the PRO Act as we're going forward. So that's where I am right now. So I'm also a little, you know, I mean, I'm a little all bunched up and tense because it's been a day that's been a roller coaster of sorts from morning, and so that's where I am. And I mean, the Taxi Workers Alliance, what can I say? I mean, it's like 1996, 1997 when we first began organizing. 1998, when we sat on bags of onions and potatoes in the basement of Bangladeshi Delhi and named the organization the New York Taxi Workers Alliance. I mean, it was one of the first quote unquote worker centers, so to speak, but we also never really thought of ourselves as a worker center in the sense that we thought of ourselves as a union. People would keep telling us, you're not a union, you're a worker center. And we'd be like, we don't know the distinction. But we, you know, if you walk like a duck and quack like a duck, you must be a duck. We do everything that unions do. And so what if there is something called the National Labor Relations Act? I mean, this is all when we were all 20-something or 30-something, and that's where the fight began. And I would say that for me, some of the interesting connections there is three really very important connections for me. One is that one of the people I discovered really early on in that process, this goes back to even a couple of years before the Taxi Workers Alliance started, was this one institution that stood in Chinatown that I kept looking at and kept looking at and kept looking at and saying, who the hell are these guys? They're just completely crazy. And that was Chinese Staff Workers Association. And so I remember very hesitantly walking in there for the first time and meeting with Wing Lam. And just, I don't know, I think I sat with him, the first time I saw him, I sat there with him for about 4.5 or 5 hours and just heard story after story after story, you know. And so for me, that moment of efflorescence when worker centers really began to explode represented a kind of an institutional coming together of an idea that had brought me to New York City. I mean, my own coming to this was because I got my PhD out of Pittsburgh, and somewhere along the way when I was doing my PhD, I'd made a decision that I really wasn't that keen on a career as a academic. I was much more keen on being an intellectual and an organizer within the political domain. And so I decided, and I was helping with various, you know, you must imagine this is Pittsburgh in the early 90s. All the unions were doing there was fighting back wage claim for steelworkers who had been laid off. And I remember sitting in those AFL-CIO small offices, helping them with their computer stuff and hearing a lot of anti-immigrant nonsense. I was transparent. I was their computer geek. I wasn't an immigrant, you know, and so for them. And so I heard lots of bigoted, nasty stuff. And so at that moment, I made a decision that I was coming to New York or to LA or to Chicago, one of the big cities, and start working in the immigrant rights movement. And, you know, so for me, that was a personal journey that brought me to New York. And once I was in New York, I mean, I think the Taxi Workers Alliance was also serendipitous in many ways, in the sense that I was hanging out with drivers at 3 o'clock in the morning in all the dhabas. And from there, you know, Bhairavi, who of course, you know, I mean, I don't know what this movement, the Taxi Workers Alliance, would have been without her. It would have been half the movement or less than that. I mean, for a person who comes out of the gender justice movement to come into the labor struggles and just pick it up and give it the kind of, you know, passion and kind of vision was just amazing. And so, you know, that historic kind of a coming together of a particular group, I can never say that the Taxi Workers Alliance would have been possible with any one of these people, but it's that moment of chemistry, that moment of everybody coming together, a lot of inspired workers. I mean, I think it was just a whole different thing. And for me, even though, as I said, you know, there was always this question, why are we being called a worker center, right? But building those bridges and going all the way in 2011 for the National Taxi Workers Alliance to become a national chartered union of the APALA-CIO, not with much resources, not comparable to many of the other nationally chartered unions, but an important one because in many ways, it was the first one after United Farm Workers, right? I mean, it's like 50 years after the AFL, and that 50 years represents a dark period of the AFL, where it went from being a possibly very progressive, leading from the front, expanding into the South, labor movement to becoming a regressive kind of centrist right-leaning organization, and it's taken a lot to pull it out of there. So 2011, when in recognition of our work, and we negotiated actually for becoming a chartered national union, and of course everything changed within 3-4 years after that, and so now it's, I mean, the New York Taxi Workers Alliance has become the first union in the country and probably the world to, you know, actually create unity among traditional taxi drivers and Uber and Lyft drivers. I mean, these are people who are supposed to fight each other. That's what the companies would like to see. And we built that unity through a unity platform we struck in 2016 and some of the most important victories that we won starting 2018. So this is, I mean, I don't know whether it was Scott, Julie, or Kent who said it. We are up against a historic moment. I mean, we are seeing the grindstone called contradictions of the capitalism just grind up against each other in a way that we've not experienced in the last 50 to 75 years, or even more from the time of the Great Depression. And I mean, it's a very different moment in terms of capitalism's own history. And so something will give, something has to give, something will, I mean, these contradictions need resolution. And all I can say is that we have to be ready when that opportunity comes, right? When that crack appears, the cracks are there, and we're already working within those cracks. But you know, something larger will give, also because of the ecological crisis and what that means, what that will translate, and how it will come into a specific relation with the labor movement as a whole. So I'll stop there. I don't know whether that responds to what you asked, Myra, but that's where I am right now.
Very interesting points, Biju. Thank you. I did listen to a interview you had with, I believe it was a public access or public TV station, where they interviewed you about the situation of what happened to taxi workers when there was the industry of, you know, the Uber and Lyft growing, and how, you know, the more people that they hired for Uber and Lyft, the less you know, the more drivers there are, the less business there are for taxi drivers. But instead of competing against each other, your organizations work for you know, solidarity and unity, and it's that type of solidarity and unity, as well as the intersectionality that Dr. Scott Kurashige mentioned earlier, those are the type of efforts that can stand against, you know, the impact of capitalism, generations, you know, into capitalism. And I do agree with you, something's got to give. And you know, we have issues like local issues in San Antonio, where collective bargaining is being used to protect police officers, but that itself is not bad. It's not what I'm saying, but it's used to protect police officers that have been fired. And with a city where we're I believe it's 75% reinstatement rate, you know, we have collective bargaining being used for that. So, you know, there's all these complexities now, you know, generations into labor organizing that we can learn from, in terms of strengthening the core and foundation of what you all have been doing for a long time. And you know, I hope that this panel will help encourage others out there to find out more and seek more information about everyone's work, because this one panel will not justify everyone's work here. Now, this is just, you know, maybe less than 2 hours discussion, but there's such a long history and rich history of our voices speaking up for civil rights and workers' rights. And there's so much to learn, because we see it all around us. Like Secretary Julie Su earlier said, you know, it can get very discouraging, because, you know, sometimes the work it feels like you're alone. And there's certainly times here in San Antonio where I felt like that, and you have to, you know, balance your self-care. But that's why I always advocate for continuity in seeing different regional histories, and continuity in different generations, and continuity in different you know, sectors of our work, because that's what's going to keep us going, especially if you can find your niche and your space of where you feel that self-care. Because for me, part of self-care is not organizing alone, seeking out the people that are on the same, energy or in same path as you, same vision, same, future. Because a lot of protests, we have to know by now that protests aren't isolated. They have to be connected to a larger goal. So for anyone out there who is just beginning in organizing, please find out about what everyone's work is, because when we do a protest, it can be tied to the larger work across the nation. And Biju, if you want to touch on any of the work that has connections to what's happening internationally.
Sure. I mean, just as I sat down for this panel, I got a text message from somebody in England saying that the same kind of attack that has begun in New York against us and all the quote unquote gig workers, that there's a new round after a Supreme Court decision in London that gave worker status to Uber drivers there, that there's a new attack through some changes of TfL, the Transport for London regulation. I just got a text message from one of my comrades at something called the International Alliance of App-Based Transport Workers, which is IAATW, was something that we set up in the last January, 29th and 30th of January in London, when about 6 groups from the United States, I mean, basically 23 associations of drivers from 16 different countries came to London to start the International Alliance of App-Based Transport Workers. We've been growing. We've just filed our first OECD complaint against Uber in Netherlands, and the work of the IAATW is growing dramatically. And in the United States, they have the most important IAATW affiliate, along with the Taxi Workers Alliance, of course, is RDU out of California. And between RDU and TWA and all the other smaller affiliates, it's been, I mean, it's been a struggle to kind of conceptualize what it means to think about employee misclassification issues here or in England. But let's say you go to Indonesia, where we have a huge union that's an affiliate with over 9,000 members, or we go to Malaysia, which has got over 11,000 members in the union. But employee status is not on the demand list simply because the local laws do not support that movement towards that in an immediate fashion. There are much more immediate goals. And so, once you enter the international domain, it's a longer struggle, it's a crazier battle. And I mean, it reminds me, and I think, Scott pointed to some of the ways in which Scott and I are connected through Grace. Grace would always say that the national struggle would never exist but for the fact that we are all international already, right? I mean, so she says that's what you bring uniquely to this. And so, I mean, I don't know, IAATW is a year old. We are pushing forward. We are building the muscle required to create huge international mobilizations. Our second year goal, our first year got eaten up with COVID quite significantly. Our second year goal is to expand our affiliate structure to at least a new level to 30 organizations across the world to be able to stand up to these orangutans like Uber and Lyft and Ola and Grab and Bolt and all of these companies across the globe. And I think the misclassification battle in the US is going to be coming to a head in the next couple of years. And how we resolve that is going to create a whole new framework for the world as a whole. And I think, some of these battles that people in India with the Indian Federation of App-Based Transport Workers, or Indonesia or Malaysia, are fighting. I mean, I was on a call with a whole group of drivers from Taiwan just 2 days ago, and trying to see whether they would be interested in coming into IAATW, though we have to deal with it with a very different level of security, etc. So these are all fascinating things that are moving forward. I mean, the international battle is a huge one, and I mean, there are other international battles that I don't know whether because I know that I might get pulled away. I'm just going to say one very small thing, which is not directly connected to the question of labor struggles and the absolutely brilliant role that Asian American labor organizers and labor activists and labor advocates and have been playing. But one of the things that at least I feel is really crucial is I don't know, to spot to think about the right wing within our own communities. So one of the struggles that at least I'm going through, because I wear multiple hats, that one is the hat of a labor organizer with the Taxi Workers Alliance, the other is as the chair of an organization called India Civil Watch International. And there we are battling a diasporic right wing here, which is completely lockstep with the fascist regime in India, right? And so the kind of things that happen there. So we need to think about how our own communities are getting structured, and how within our own communities there are these regressive forces, and how we think about those issues also. I know it's apropos to nothing in the sense that I think the conversation that we built this far has its own dynamic, and I think we should stay with that. But just because of the possibility that I might get pulled away, I'm just putting that down as something that we could potentially pick up later, if at all we get there. It's not the most important thing right now in this conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Biju. And Aquilina, I know that a lot of the work that Filipino Worker Center is tied into the international efforts, especially in Philippines for workers there. But before I ask you to talk about Filipino Worker Center and its impact today, or how it started and everything, I also invite you to share any words about John Balaro, because I know he helped start Filipino Worker Center.
Yes. Yeah, John was one of the founders of PWC, and it's like what Scott said, we were really looking to visualize and help support building worker leadership in our communities and breaking the model minority myth that all Filipinos are now professionals and all well off here, and then that's what we should value only. But really, I mean, most people at that time, when you ask them about Filipino workers, the low-wage Filipino workers, who do you think of? They would think of either overseas Filipinos around the world, or Filipino farm workers, but in a past tense kind of way, and not really think about who are Filipino workers here in the United States. And we didn't really have as much of a face or a voice, and so we just knew. And I spent a year in the Philippines with the National Democratic Movement, and got to spend time also with domestic workers in Hong Kong and the organizing that was going on there, and just really got to understand how critical, how critical it is for an overall movement to be grounded in worker perspective and worker power, and we really saw that that's one thing that was lacking here. And so we were really influenced by by the worker centers, and with John, what I most remember him for is, I mean, I only saw him a few times actually in his mobilization with Jessica McClintock. I was a little bit at the tail end of that, but although I've seen him in mobilizations plenty of times. But what I really remember John for is we actually did summer activist training, and that's a training that we did that we've been doing here in Los Angeles for young Asian American API and ANHPI young folks here in Los Angeles to get training and exposure to organizing and to what's actually happening in terms of organizing in the community here in Los Angeles, and be grounded in that history as well. And love it when we were able to get, Professor Glenn Omatsu to come out and talk about the history and the legacy. And so for me, John was one of the core organizers who helped really develop out that curriculum. And based on his organizing experience in the unions, he was just so wise in terms of really how to that an organizer is not you so focused on you as an organizer. It has to be what is the role of the organizer in really supporting and empowering or supporting the transformation of workers themselves to feel their own agency, to be able to make a difference in their own lives, in their work sites, in their communities, in this nation. And so he would put up quotes around the room when we would do the trainings. One of them's never do anything for a worker that they can do for themselves, quotes like that. And, coming out of college, you think, oh, I can do so many, you have a different role, you have a different worldview that is a little bit focused on yourself, right? And so it's how you really change that and shift and really understand how important, your role is not about you, your role is about the workers, right? And how you're supporting them. And so, so it really helped to ground that perspective that he brought, helped to ground myself and helped to ground PwC in the importance of really building strong, leaderful membership base of workers. And any kind of worker organization that you're organizing has to be owned by the workers, right? It has to be led by the workers. And how do you actually do that? It's so much more difficult than just talking about it, right? Because it is, it's how do you create those structures that build unity, that build transformation, and create a real role for every worker that's coming into the organization? And how do you build the real, with the capacity to be strategic, to, and to really lead the organization. So, John was also very rooted in the farm worker organizing, right? He was a student, of the farm worker organizing. And I've been able to learn more and more just over the past couple of years also about the details of that, and just appreciate, what was the difference between the United Farm Workers, the UFW, and the Teamsters, who were both organizing farm workers. And that even though the Teamsters had all this money, right, to throw at it, it was the United Farm Workers who had built their own real strategic capacity based on the farm workers, organizing the workers to be the active agents of the union, that made it so powerful and built the strategic capacity of the organization to pivot, to boycotting, to think creatively, to really understand how they needed to move and organize, that they were able to win the contracts and able to win more and really push more for the farm workers because it was the farm workers themselves who were the ones pushing that. And so that's the inspiration that that moves me also in the work that we're doing. And it's we organize now in the Filipino Worker Center, really focused around domestic workers, and specifically Filipino home care workers, working in individual homes as well as in small RCFE facilities. And so this is a population that a lot of folks didn't think were organizable at all. It's not the easiest, it's definitely not the easiest industry to organize. But we just saw that there were so many in our community working as home care workers. As we would go in and just talk to workers, even if they were working in other jobs, caregiving was their fallback. And so or was their first jobs here. And so we have this huge population of Filipino caregivers who, like, you know, there's a huge amount who are undocumented, who are making as little as like $2 an hour with no overtime, right? In these facilities or individual homes. And so for us, that's where we decided to focus, because we saw so much that's where our community needed organizing. And they're spread out everywhere, kind of like gig workers, right? So there's not like one central like place to go, but and we've become a part of this amazing domestic worker movement here in California, in the United States, and internationally. And it's a really amazing movement that has a lot of amazing API women, especially organizers and leaders in it, like Aijen Poo. You know, here we have Filipino Advocates for Justice, who are a part of the California Domestic Worker Coalition. And here we're also, I think it's like, we've seen the evolution of the worker centers. You know, we started, you know, just like getting grounded in the 90s, and like, I just see the growth and the complexity of the work and the strategies that's built on kind of like the base of power that we're building amongst the workers, but just building so much more complexity, working with government and co-enforcement, right? So partnering with Julie and, you know, other amazing people where we're able to like then use all different types of levers and strategies to think about not only how can we pass policy like the California Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. You know, we're able to end the exclusion of overtime for domestic workers here in California after 75 years of exclusion. But we will also now, it's like, it's not enough to just pass a bill. How do we make it a reality? And so we have to come up with, you know, governing and enforcement strategies to make it a reality. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. So, and of course, you know, being able to do these strategies together with the government, building task force where we're able to go in and really have strategic impact by organizing workers, building campaigns, and winning, having winner cases win, and workers see the results of their fights and making an impact across the industry. You know, that's what's been really key. And then evolving to electoral work, thinking about how do we also have this worker voice in our democracy and leading in our democracy. It's all been evolving. It's kind of mind-blowing. I see so many intersections with all the work that everyone else is doing here. I'm so in awe of a lot of the work that the taxi drivers are doing, and like Rideshare United here in Los Angeles. I'm so in awe of so much of the work that's happening around. But yeah, that was my answer for John DeLora, right? But that's overall about PwC as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Aquilina. And I just want to say that when I was describing John earlier, we were just having our casual talk about, you know, how amazed I am at the evolution also, you know, the maturity of John DeLora from, you know, when I first knew him to, you know, watching his work from here in Texas. I feel the same about you, Aquilina. I remember when we used to attend meetings and, you know, learning the political ideology, you know, and it's really you know, a room full of people with a passion to create the change, because they already see, and we have the instinct of what's wrong. If a worker is being abused and being, you know, misused for human labor, you know, it was like a collection of young people, and we were learning about political ideology. But it also depended, like not everybody went to start things, right? But you were one of the few that actually did. And the way, you know, when as I hear your updates from about PwC, it's that type of strategy, planning, and formation that does require long-term vision for any change. And you've been in it for more than 2 decades, and I can attest to your maturity and growth and evolution as well, Aquilina. And I'm really proud of you. And as you talk, I hear the parallels between the work of Julie Sue's work as well, with very similar abuse cases, with people being earning only $2 an hour. Shwe, I'm so excited to have met you when I first learned of you a few months ago. What would you say the priorities and needs of APALA, Texas are right now? I understand you're fairly new. So when did APALA start, and what are your priorities and goals?
I think in 2006, May, APALA called the Texas AFL-CIO. They want to open the Texas chapter in Texas for APALA. So the AFL-CIO, and they call my union brother SIU. So I'm the only Asian delegate in the whole AFL-CIO that time. So they asked me, Shwe, can you help to set up the APALA chapter in Texas? I say, yes, I will. And I work with the Julie Chu from APALA. So I asked her what I need to found the APALA Texas chapter here. So she asked me, I have to go get the signature from the different union and the endorsement. So I told her, just give me a week. So, and then I got all the paperwork they needed. And we have May 18, we have the APALA chapter, the opening. I don't know how they were founded in Texas. So most of my SIU brother, they are the Filipino seafarer because they work on the ship. So they joined the APALA and also SCIU and the other postal worker. So all the Asian Union member came to my office to the APALA chapter in Texas. The problem is I just happened to found the APALA Texas chapter, and then finally we cannot choose who to run the president position and other stuff. So everybody agreed, and Shwe, you should be the one to get the position for the president because I happen to be the APALA chapter in Texas. But I say, can somebody do it better than me because my English is my second language and I stay learning the union in US. But everybody says, sure, you'll be okay. And they elect me as the chapter president for the APALA chapter. Since then, I stay the APALA chapter president. And right now, I feel like we need to change the law here, like right to war state. Most of the Asian union member, I go and talk to them for joining the APALA, and they just say, no, we don't have to join it. This is right to war state. So what can you do about it? So I have to talk to them one-to-one conversation with them. Why I need them to be joining the APALA. The benefit of the APALA member and other thing. So it's very hard. So I think we need to change the right to war state law first. And also we need to educate the union member to join the APALA because in here I've been talking most of the community like Taiwanese, Chinese, Vietnamese, and I try to get them to get the APALA to join the APALA. But if they hear like union work, they start to walk away. because maybe most of them here like the Republican, I don't know, maybe like me, like I'm from Burma, right? The union don't. We only hear the union is the bad, bad in our country. That's the reason they're afraid of. So I think we need to educate the Asian people about how can we do like the union for the. So in Texas now we are doing like the citizenship clinic for the AFSCL. So we send all the paperwork and email and phone call to my member and the Asian community. Whoever want to apply for the citizenship, it's going to be free or charged, the lawyer and everything. So we started doing that. And this is a good thing. Maybe once they become the citizenship, they can be part of the Democratic Party or the union thing. They're going to support it. So that's why I think about we need to do it in Texas.
Thank you for the historical landmark of starting a chapter here. It's very commendable because I was surprised when I did hear there's a chapter in Texas, and I look forward to seeing it grow. And I certainly hope the San Antonio community here can do what we can to support you. I know there's a lot, like the things you mentioned are similar to what Aquilina was mentioning earlier with policy and regulation and the complexities of the work. So I hope to continue to support you as you grow. Mary Jung, you were a significant part of the early history of organizing women's rights in Ohio. Can you tell us how that was?
Sure, but first I just wanted to, just listening to this amazing panel of young women and men, and all the important work that you've done in organizing. What it struck me was the importance, when you're talking about John DeLauro, is the importance of mentorship and how much he brought everybody along and how important that was. And then the other thing he did is that he used humor. And that was one of the things that when we, that was brought out in the documentary 9 to 5, was one of the differences in our movement, organizing women office workers, was how we used facts and statistics, but we also used humor to drive the point home and to draw attention to us and, and what the issues were. And so, I think that, Mr. DeLauro was completely on the mark. And I absolutely love that chant that he had about, your dresses are pink and your wages stink. I wrote that down because I think it's one to remember or something very similar. So I really do appreciate that history. I actually had never heard about Mr. DeLauro. And so it's really wonderful to hear that there are other Asian leaders out there. Let's say, this would have been about his 50th birthday this year. I'm heading off into retirement at the age of 67. And so I think that, what I view my role right now is just mentoring the next generation. And I really appreciate what he did for you and hearing all the things that you're doing out in your communities. What was different for me than for many of you is that I was in Cleveland, Ohio back in the 60s and 70s. And during that period, there were very few Asian families. And so to be an organizer, it was organizing, for me, it was organizing women and people of color, or, we were known as minorities back then. But it wasn't just Asians because there were not that many of us. It was a lot of Blacks, a lot of Puerto Ricans, a lot of women. And the issues are the same, right? If you're not being paid well, it doesn't, if you're not getting your child care, sexual harassment wasn't even a term back then. All those things, it's a problem, and it doesn't matter, what ethnicity, what race that you are. And so, if you can just, for us, it was just organizing based on our commonalities and just making sure that we did the best job we could of integrating. One of the things that our organizations did was that we made it a point to make sure that we integrated our groups as much as possible. That, we had a project that was being led by a younger person. We made sure that there were older people also in that group, vice versa. If a project was led by an Asian person, we made sure that the rest of the committee was filled by a balance of other ethnicities in the organization. And so, we think that helped a lot. And it also, I think networking is really what brought us all together. And so along with the networking, we also taught people new skills. And by doing that, we were able to bring them along into organizing and into success. In the 70s, we filed a huge class action suit against the national banks, which did end up being successful. And, some of the banks immediately, once they realized what was going on, and, so, for some, it might have been the goodness of the heart. Most likely it was probably, they knew that it would be bad for the pocketbook if they just continued on the path that they were on. We did receive some immediate success. And so, it's refreshing to be like the only Asian organizer back in 1974, to see Julie Su as the Deputy Secretary of Labor. I mean, that is just such an amazing transformation. Anyone who watches the movie 9 to 5, what you see is that there's a lot of commiserating and sadness because the first major organizing job at Cuyahoga Community College did not win. And the movie ends kind of like on this sad note. But for me, I thought, I went into the mayor's office in San Francisco in 1995, and the largest union representing San Francisco workers was SEIU, which was office workers. And had it not been the work that was done in the early 70s, mid 70s, we would not have what we have today in labor. And so, for all of us who are out there organizing, whatever our ethnicity, I know that we all understand the struggle and we know what it's like for working people. And I just really am so proud of everybody for all the work that you've done. And I'm so proud of Julie Su for, what an accomplishment. And especially for our community, it's really amazing. So Myra, thank you very much for organizing this panel and having us all come on and talk about our experiences. I learned so much about what's going on. California is much different than Texas, but in the end, the struggles are the same.
So true, Mary. Thank you for sharing all that. And as we come to a close for this panel, and I want to thank you all. And I know that the panelists who had to leave because there's multiple meetings happening at the same time today. And I'm so grateful that they still took time to join us and to share their work and their stories with our audience. This is precious. I'm so glad that everyone that I invited was able to come. And I'm just honored for that you spent your evening with me today. And I say that for the people that also had to leave early. But as we come to a close, I just want to ask everyone to share their answer to this question. What are the important implications of the work and legacy of Asian Americans in the labor movement for the Democratic Party as the Democratic Party is today, especially Asian Americans who play some role in the party?
I actually have to get off, but again, thank you for allowing all of us to share. I mean, what I think I learned here in San Francisco, especially with everything going on with Asian hate, is that we just have to speak up. And if there's anything that we need, anything we want, anything that we have to do in solidarity to lift up our community, we have to really organize. And, panels like this help us get to know each other so we can do this, not just in our little enclaves, but, throughout the state, throughout the country. And, I just cannot express enough the amount of times in San Francisco, you know, you kind of like think, oh, in San Francisco, but there's plenty of Asians, you know, there's not discrimination. The problem is that it's almost open season because there are so many Asians. Okay, it's like, oh, you want to pick on an Asian? You don't. It's like we're right front and center in front of you. Okay, and so people just need to speak out. People need to band together, and we need to understand that when somebody calls for help, no matter what race it is, no matter what their culture, that we join them. And I think that we have, and I think others need to do the same for us. And we're not going to get out of this mess without everybody talking to each other and working together. So really, thank you very much. And I'm sorry I have to sign off.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you so much. And for the audience, I'm sure that a lot of us agree with what Mary just said, because as we all know, the culture of capitalism is very much individualistic. So being more collective about changes to the impact of capitalism on human life, you know, is of course going to involve being collective. Dr. Kurashige, do you want to share your answer for my question? What are the important implications of the work and legacy of Asian Americans in the labor movement for the Democratic Party, especially Asian Americans?
You know, I think that's an important question, because there was a time when the parties competed to see who could get more votes from the exclusionists, right? Who could take a more anti-Asian stand, who was more going to get more credit for things like Chinese exclusion or you know, Japanese American incarceration during World War II. There were certainly leaders of both parties that oftentimes were involved. And so I think it's just been really important for Asian Americans to struggle and organize, because the labor exploitation has gone hand in hand with the political exploitation, political disenfranchisement, and the anti-Asian violence, right? Those things have always reinforced each other. And it's so important that now we are challenging all those things simultaneously. People are organizing, people are campaigning. And as Asian American populations are growing, and as people are getting more, you know, getting more people out to vote and to be registered, you know, we're seeing that like the amount of people voting is making a difference, right? In who's winning or losing different elections. But we're also seeing in some of these states like Georgia, for instance, or that in response, there have been these massive voter suppression campaigns, you know, and obviously, you know, this is a sign particularly of resistance and opposition to these high turnouts, not just from Asian Americans, particularly from African Americans, right? And communities of color. And even in Texas, even though, you know, some of the, you know, results didn't go the way that all of the necessarily community of color organizers had hoped, we're seeing these same voter suppression campaigns to prevent the numbers from being translated into actual legislative power. So I just think it's really important to recognize we're at a real turning point in history for so many reasons, but just this basic right to have your vote, right, respected in the midst of all these voter suppression campaigns and the extreme gerrymandering that's taking place, right, already in Texas, and it could get even worse, you know, with the 2020 results.
Maybe I'll just chime in also. I think, so APIs are like the fastest growing voter population. Like we have the fastest rate of growth right now in the United States. But I think our community overall is not really taken seriously by really any of the parties necessarily as like a force to be reckoned with. But like here in California, I think that's definitely shifting. There is so much that's happening in terms of organizing. C4s that are coming out. We just actually established our C4, Filipino Action Center, that will be going into action this next year. And so like some of my message is also that, like, you know, APIs, we're organizing, and we're organizing in coalition with other people of color, working class, communities, and that, those are, we're building power in that way. And it is our job actually to help. How do we make sure that we're reaching out to all of our own community and organizing to really understand the connections? I think the Democratic Party right now is not doing enough around immigration. That is an issue that so much impacts API communities, especially like the Filipino community. It's so huge. That we need to really hold accountable. I mean, there's so many opportunities for things that are happening because there's a shift, but we can't just accept it for the way it was before, just bringing it back before Trump. We have to demand more. And in order to do that, we actually have to organize and also hold accountable, and really push the administration, push the party. California is overwhelmingly Democrat. However, we do have this whole large mod squad as well of moderate Dems who are more and more conservative. And so we need to make sure that we're also organizing, holding them accountable as well, because, on issues of workers' rights, I think Biju lifted up in terms of that critical issue of misclassification, whether we're going to accept this misclassification of workers and give up all of the worker rights that we fought for over the decades. How we're going to define that is going to be so critical. And I don't think the Democratic Party has a really good, clear stance on that. Together with labor unions, we have to really make sure that that's something that workers' rights are not given up. So I think immigration, those are two key places that need to be pushed. And also that we also need to build even more representation. It's great that we have our first ever Attorney General who's, Filipino Attorney General. And there is starting to be some more representation, but we still need more. And it can't just be anyone. It has to be someone like Julie, right? Someone who is also really dedicated to the same kind of values and is really dedicated to the community and the workers that, they're coming from. So, it's a challenge for the party, but it's a challenge for us in terms of how do we actually organize and hold them accountable?
Thank you for sharing that. Filipino Americans happen to be the largest Asian Pacific community here in San Antonio. So it's very helpful to hear these words and perspectives. Certainly in San Antonio, the community, the labor organizing community was disappointed in the local AFL-CIO's stance on the Proposition B we had here that was to get rid of the collective bargaining part of the San Antonio's adoption of the Texas Code because of how it was being implemented, because there was certain limitations that prevented people in power from holding reinstated cops accountable. For example, a very short limitation of statute of 180 days to file any complaint or grievance or a case against a wrongdoing, and little things like that, and collective bargaining, protecting dirty cops, and how the language was used to go against Proposition B, like an effort that included the solidarity work to, coming from the labor sector. It was very disappointing to hear that there was that resolution made to oppose Proposition B when it was really about protecting civil rights. And there's efforts now in the city to, include the community about it. But of course, it's that clash within the organizing community, I believe, left a very sour taste, and especially for the ones that were involved in that work from the beginning, from the ground up. We as an organization very much feel that. But thank you to all the panelists that joined us earlier and had to leave. Again, congratulations to Julie Sue. And we do look forward to her confirmation. And I believe on our page, we will share more information on how to find out more about these organizations and the great work that each panelist has been doing. And before I close, I just want to thank you, Dr. Scott Kurashige and Aquilina Soriano, for sticking it to the very end. I know the people who left earlier, like I said, had multiple meetings going on at the same time. It's quite a month, right? May Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month is quite a busy month for us as well. I just want to give a shout out to all our Asian American Democrats of South Texas chapter officers, Roy Quismundo and Nicolette Ardiente. They do a lot of work behind the scenes. Roy Ardiente was doing the graphics for this event and all our other events. The prettier ones, the ones that aren't so exciting, I did. And Nicolette Ardiente was doing the social media, especially on Instagram. And so I thank you to the audience for sticking out to listen to us. If anyone wasn't able to hear the whole thing, of course, it's recorded and still available on our page. And I just want to wish you all a good night. And if anyone has any final words to say.
Just thank you.
Yeah, thank you for organizing this, Myra. It's really great too. It was an amazing panel.
It's a great reunion for me as well.